Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and remember, Context is Everything Media Network founder and CEO John Michael is reading a textbook cover to cover. Today, Chapter 35, page 888, Section 2. And I find this one to be interesting, so listen. Forces shaping the modern Middle East from 1945 to August 2001. This is interesting. Thank you to all subscribers. We hit 67 yesterday, a tip of the hat. Thank you. Setting the scene. In the Arab world, as in South Asia, nationalists sought to free themselves from the legacy of imperialism. We are erasing the traces of the past, declared Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser in the 1950s. We are building our country on the strong and sound bases. Leaders of Nasser's generation embarked on ambitious reforms. Their policies, however, often failed to bring promised improvements. By the 1970s, Islamic reformers began to offer another route to modernization. Diversity and nationalism. New heading. What does the term Middle East mean? Western powers first used this term to refer to the region between Europe and what they called the Far East, China, Japan, and Southeast Asia. To avoid the Western bias, some people now call the region Southwest Asia. No one calls it Southwest Asia, in the United States at least. Yet the UN and many scholars and journalists continue to use the term Middle East, and they continue still. This book was written in 2001, remember, and this is a section about the modern Middle East from a perspective of August 2001, so I'm interested to hear that perspective. Experts differ on what areas lie in the Middle East. In this chapter, we use the term to refer to the region from Egypt in the west to Iran in the east, and from Turkey in the north to the Arabian Peninsula in the south. Religious and cultural diversity. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all emerged in the Middle East. Today, most people in the region are Muslim, but many Jews and Christians also live there. Different sects within these religions also add to the diversity. Middle Eastern people speak more than 30 different languages, including Arabic, Turkish, Persian, Hebrew, Kurdish, and Armenian. Every country is home to minority groups, some as many as a dozen. The Kurds, for example, are an ethnic group divided by modern borders among Turkey, Iraq, and Iran. Their efforts to win autonomy have led to repression. Like Christians in Europe, Muslims in the Middle East share the same basic faith that belong to different national groups. Arabs, Iranians, Turks have their own cultures, languages, and histories. Often such differences have created divisions. Winning independence. In the Middle East, as elsewhere, imperialism and nationalism were powerful forces. In the decades after World War I, Arab nationalists opposed the mandate system that placed Arab territories under European rule. Iraq won freedom from Britain in 1932. After World War II, British and French mandates won complete independence as nations of Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. After World War II, British-French mandates won complete independence as nations of Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. This is definitely just a whole section that's worth revisiting, because already I'm learning. The Pan-Arab dream of the United Arab State foundered as nations pursued individual goals. What does foundered mean? The pan-Arab dream of a united Arab state foundered as nations pursued individual goals. Still, their common heritage linked Arabs across borders. Pan-Arabism survived as the Arab League, which promoted Arab solidarity in times of crisis and worked for common economic goals. This is something I've never heard of. I'm curious to see if it exists still. What's it called? The Arab League. Arab League is a political organization which tries to integrate members economically and solve. Okay. I guess it still exists. Okay. Still exists. Okay. Colonial legacy. Despite winning independence, Arab nations remained economically dependent on the West. Westerners owned industries and banks. They provided the capital and technology needed for development as well as the principal market for exports. Ending Western economic domination became a key goal of many governments. Imperialism left another legacy. Britain and France had drawn borders to serve their own interests. At independence, Arab nations inherited these borders, which often led to disputes. For example, Iraq included diverse and sometimes hostile groups. Colonial borders also limited Iraq's access to the Persian Gulf. Religious and ethnic tensions, plus a desire for outlets on the Gulf, continue to fuel conflicts in Iraq. Yes, they do. And they did. Because we went to war with Iraq 2 years after this book was published. Because of that. And not much else. Where are my sticky notes? Where are my sticky notes? I'm going to put a whole sticky note on this page because this is one worth revisiting. Pan-Arabism. There they are. Oh, yeah. Interesting. Why do I find it interesting? I'm going to read that last sentence one last time. Colonial borders also limited Iraq's access to the Persian Gulf. Religious and ethnic tensions, plus a desire for outlets to the Gulf, continue to fuel conflicts in Iraq. Okay, maybe I was wrong, but still in all, we were wrong to go into that country for battle. Conflict over Palestine. As you read, in 1917, Britain issued the Balfour Declaration, which pledged support for a Jewish national home in Palestine. The declaration deepened tensions in that region. Both Jews and Palestinian Arabs claimed a historical right to the land. Jewish migration to Palestine, which began in the late 1800s, increased after World War II. In the United States, especially, the horrors of the Holocaust created strong support for the Jewish homeland. But growing migration and conflicting British policies led to violent clashes. As turmoil increased, Britain turned over its mandate to the United Nations. In 1947, the UN drew up a plan to partition Palestine into an Arab and Jewish state. Jews accepted the plan, but Arabs rejected it. They saw it as a plan to relocate European Jews on Arab territory. As turmoil increased, Britain turned over its mandate to the United Nations. In 1947, the UN drew up a plan to partition Palestine into an Arab and Jewish state. Jews accepted the plan, but Arabs rejected it. They saw it as a plan to relocate European Jews on Arab territory. Yeah. The birth of Israel. After Britain withdrew in 1948, Jews proclaimed the independent state of Israel. The United States and Soviet Union both recognized Israel. That is, they formally agreed to treat it as a legitimate nation. Israeli forces fought well against the poorly equipped and badly led Arab forces. In the end, Israel increased its territory. Other Arab-Israeli wars would follow, as you will read. Israel developed rapidly after 1948. The government built towns for settlers and provided many services. American aid and high taxes gave Israel the capital to invest in industry and agriculture. In spite of scarce natural resources, a skilled and educated workforce made rapid progress. Israelis built factories and developed methods to farm their arid land. Kibbutzim, or collective farming, produced crops for export. Refugees issue. The Arab-Israeli War in 1948 uprooted 700,000 Arabs from Palestine. The UN set up temporary shelters for Palestinian refugees. These poverty-stricken camps have since become permanent homes. Recent generations of Palestinian refugees have grown up bitterly determined to win a homeland of their own. Resolving the refugee issue would remain a thorny problem in the peace process for decades. Political and economic patterns. New heading. After winning independence, Middle Eastern nations worked to modernize their government and economies. Parts of the region sit atop the world's largest oil reserves, which brought regional and global consequences. Governments. Most Middle Eastern nations developed authoritarian governments. In Egypt and Iraq, revolutionary military leaders toppled monarchs who were closely tied to Western powers. In other countries, such as Jordan and Saudi Arabia, hereditary monarchs remained in power but took steps to adapt to the modern world. In Iraq and Syria, a single party won power. Dictators like Iraq's Saddam Hussein brutally suppressed opponents but enjoyed some of the popular backing because their social and economic policies improved life for many. Only Israel and Turkey formed multi-party democratic systems. In both of these countries, however, minority groups, Kurds in Turkey and Arabs in Israel, faced restrictions or serious discrimination. Impact of oil. Because the Middle East commanded vital oil resources, the United States and other powers increased their political and military presence in the region. At the same time, in 1973, OPEC oil embargo showed that oil could be a powerful diplomatic and economic weapon. Oil is unevenly distributed. Only a few countries, mostly on the Persian Gulf, have large oil reserves. Oil-rich Saudi Arabia and Kuwait have small populations. Turkey and Egypt, with much larger populations, have little oil. As a result, references between haves and have-nots differences between haves and have-nots have fueled resentment within the region. Oil-rich nations built roads, hospitals, and schools. Poorer countries lacked capital needed for development. Water resources. Many experts have predicted that water, not oil, may soon become the most valuable resource in the Middle East. Most of the region has limited rainfall. Growing populations and rising standards of living have increased the demands for water. Farmers can produce good crops if they can get water. Farming accounts for 80% of water use in the Middle East. To meet this urgent demand, oil-rich countries have built desalination plants that convert salty seawater into fresh water? Why don't we do that in California? They were doing that in 2001? Individual nations have built dams to supply water both for crops and hydroelectric power. Turkey, for example, erected 22 dams in the late 1980s, including a great Ataturk Dam. Its goal was to irrigate southeastern Turkey with water from the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, turning the region into a breadbasket. Yet dam building has sparked explosive debates over water resources. Many rivers run through several countries. The Euphrates rises in Turkey but flows through Syria and Iraq. Israel, Jordan, and Syria all have claims on the waters of the River Jordan. As water needs grow, nations that share river systems must seek ways to use that scarce resource cooperatively. Economic policies. In the 1950s, the Arab nations turned to socialism as a way to end foreign economic control and modernize rapidly. They nationalized banks, oil companies, and factories. Despite such moves, they still depend on the industrial world for much of their technology. To get capital, governments took foreign loans. They then built large projects in industry and agriculture, especially dams and other irrigation systems. In some countries, they redistributed land to peasants. But small farmers did not produce efficiently, and food output did not keep pace with rapid population growth. By the 1990s, under pressure from the IMF, other international leaders, many governments eased restrictions on foreign ownership. They privatized some state-run enterprises. The Middle East, like other developing nations, faced grave economic challenges. Heavy borrowing left them deeply in debt and owing massive sums just in debt services. Also, while nations had built some industry and cities had boomed, large segments of people still lived in poverty. Islamic revival. New heading. Islam has been a shaping force in the Middle East for more than 1,300 years. As in the past, the Quran and the Sharia provide guidance on all aspects of life. Some religious faith, law, and government from religious faith, law, and government to family and business relationships. Western influences. During the age of imperialism, Westerners urged Muslim nations to modernize. To the West, modernization meant adopting Western forms of secular government and law. It also meant keeping religion and government separate. After nearly a century of Western influence, some Middle Eastern leaders adopted Western models of development, promising economic progress and social justice. In the 1950s and 1960s, Western cultural influences increased. In the growing cities, people wore Western-style clothing, watched American television programs, and brought foreign products. Yet despite government promises, life improved very little for many people. When their leaders were unable to solve mounting problems, many people became disillusioned. Calls for reform. By the 1970s, in the face of failed development and repressive regimes, many Muslim leaders and writers called for a return to Sharia. They blamed social and economic ills on blind imitations of Western models and applied Islamic principles to the search for solutions. Islamic reformers, also called fundamentalists by Westerners, did not reject modernization, but they did reject Westernization. They argued that renewed commitments to Islam was the only way out of their current problems. Offering Islam as an inspiration, the movement appealed to the poor and educated Muslims alike. Impact. By the 1990s, Islamic revival had spread across Muslim world, from Morocco to Indonesia. Its impact varied from country to country. In Iran, you will also read, revolutionaries overthrew an unpopular Shah as early as 1979. In Algeria, voters supported members of a party that had pledged to restore the Sharia. In Egypt and elsewhere, some extremists justified terrorist acts as a weapon against authoritarian secular governments. Other Muslim groups worked within the system for political reform and social programs. Across the Muslim world, the Islamic revival sparked heated debates between reformers and secularists. Issues ranged from science to crime. Like Christian fundamentalists in the West, many devout Muslims opposed any scientific view of the world that excluded belief in God as creator and ruler of the universe. They also urged political restrictions to put power in the hands of religious leaders. Women in the Muslim world. And this is the last heading of today's time. Thank you for joining us here on the Context is Everything Media Network. Thank you. 67 subscribers. 68, 1 thumbs up. 69, 2 thumbs up. But either way, a smile. Women in the Muslim world. Conditions for women vary greatly from country to country in the modern Middle East. Since the 1950s, women in most countries have won voting rights and equality before the law. They attend schools and universities in growing numbers. Middle and upper class women have entered professions such as law, engineering, and medicine. The changes have taken place at different rates in different places. In Turkey, Syria, and Egypt, many urban women gave up long-held practices such as wearing hijab, or cover, on the head. On the other hand, conservative countries like Saudi Arabia and Iran have opposed the spread of many Western secular influences among women. Return to the hijab. Hijab? In recent decades, many educated Muslim women have returned to wearing the hijab. For some women, the movement symbolized resistance to unpopular governments or a refusal to imitate Western culture. I think of Muslim dress as a kind of uniform. One Egyptian student said, I can sit in class with men, and there is no question of attraction, and so on. We are all involved in the same business of learning. Most important, women who elected to return to the hijab saw it as an expression of sincere loyalty to Muslim values and practices. Continuing issues. Still, some women in Muslim countries were dismayed. They argued against social and political forces that put severe limits on their lives. Under Sharia law, women traditionally held powerful positions in the family and played important economic roles. In some countries, though, laws and traditions emerged that limited women's rights to vote, work, or even drive cars. Many Muslim and non-Muslim women spoke out on the need for women to realize their full potential and to contribute to national life. Asterisk. The Arabic word hijab means following Islamic guidelines for women's dress in public. The practice includes a variety of head coverings as well as a long, loose-fitting garment. In English, the word is often translated as veiling, though only a small fraction of Muslim women cover their faces. Thank you. Kindly. Have a good day. God bless. That's it.